Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. Amen.
Thank you, Angela. Has anyone seen the film Gravity? Has George Clooney and Sandra Bullock as two astronauts who end up stranded and isolated in space with very little hope of staying alive and returning to Earth. Here's a short clip from the film. It has Sandra, hang on Chris, back one. It has Sandra Bullock's character, Dr. Ryan Stone, contemplating her own mortality as she's basically cast adrift in space and reflecting on her dire predicament from which there seems to be no way out. If we could put the lights down, Chris, and then start the clip. You might need to flick back one.
I'm dying, Annika. I know, we're all gonna die. Everybody knows that. But I'm gonna die today. Funny that, to know. But the thing is that I'm still scared. I'm really scared. Nobody will mourn for me. No one will pray for my soul. Will you mourn for me? Will you say a prayer for me? Or is it too late? I mean, I'd say one for myself, but I've never prayed in my life, so nobody ever taught me how. Nobody ever taught me how.
You bring the lights up, Chris. No one ever taught me how. Has anyone ever taught you how to pray? Given that our tradition or our background for most of us here, at least as Church of Scotland, the answer to that is actually probably not. The Church of Scotland as a tradition or a church, at least in recent years, tends not to have been very good at that sort of thing. I'm delighted that as a church we're going to be doing the prayer course. Feels to me very much like the right time in our journey as a congregation to be doing this, to be focusing on and learning about prayer. Week by week, we gather in church and we say the words of the Lord's Prayer together. This is regarded as the touchstone of Christian prayer. Most of us will know it by heart, and the words will probably just trip out from us because they're now part of our DNA, of who we are as individuals and as a people together. But what happens immediately before Jesus offers or teaches the Lord's Prayer to his disciples? Well, they say to him, and if you like, they pray or petition to him, Lord, teach us to pray. Now, what a good thing to ask for, to ask to be taught to pray. Ryan Stone, Sandra Bullock says, no one ever taught me how. The disciples say, Lord, teach us to pray. They're like direct opposites. No one ever taught me how. Lord, teach us to pray. If no one has ever taught you to pray, or that seems like a strange word or a strange idea, then if that's really the case, you shouldn't be content just to let it be. it should actually be, given what prayer is, it should be a matter of urgency, personal urgency, to shift the balance between those statements, "No one ever taught me how," and "Lord, teach us to pray." It should be a matter of urgency to shift the balance towards, "Lord, teach me how to pray." Now, I don't know and I can't promise that our focus on prayer, both in our worship on Sunday mornings and in the prayer course over the next few weeks and months, will do this for you, will teach you how to pray. But I certainly hope it could be a start for some of us. And I can't promise that attending the prayer course will transform your life so that prayer ceases to be something awkward, unfulfilling, mysterious, maybe even embarrassing, a source of guilt, if we even choose to think about it at all. Can't promise it will transform your life, but it might do. It really might. And let me do just one last bit of salesmanship here. For some of us, the idea of discussing prayer in small groups after having watched a video like the prayer course will involve, the idea of doing that is a real barrier, a genuine barrier. You know, you would think, wild horse, I'd like to do that, but really wild horses wouldn't persuade me to enter that environment. If that is a real barrier for you, I can only encourage you to cross it. Over the last few years, a good number of folk in this congregation have got involved in small groups like this and found it to be a real benefit and a blessing to their life. And most of those folk who've got involved in Bible Fresh and other small groups in this church have felt exactly like you might feel, with that sense of trepidation about what might be involved. And let me finish the sales pitch here. As a church, we often invite or ask you along to events or activities. Let me ask you the question, how many of those events or activities have made you feel personally awkward or ill at ease? And I'd hazard a guess, I'm not going to ask for hands up, that the answer to that is very rarely, very occasionally, in fact, probably not at all. In fact, most of the time you felt welcome and accommodated and actually discovered the things that you've gone along to that have been part of what we do in this church have been really, really good to be part of. Then why on earth would the prayer course be any different? It is a safe and welcoming place. No one ever taught me how to pray. Lord, teach us how to pray. Sales pitch over. This week, we introduce the grand theme of prayer. In the following weeks, we'll shift to the Lord's Prayer. But this week, we began at the beginning in the Psalms. Why have we sung 3 Psalms in this service? Why has Angela read Psalm 1, the very first Psalm for us? Well, the Bible has 2 great examples of prayer. The first and most obvious that we'd all get is the Lord's Prayer. The second one is slightly less obvious, and that's the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms, or songs, are mainly, although not entirely, prayers, but they are all closely related with prayers. They are human expressions of our deepest feelings. These are the Psalms. Feelings of joy, delight, anger, illness, grief, blessing, goodness, suffering, honesty, fear, loneliness, worship. Given that we've a whole book of Psalms, 150 of them to be precise, we might guess that the first of those Psalms, and remember there's an editor behind here who chooses and says, what one am I going to make number 1? What one do I want to set us on a course with the book of Psalms? We might guess that the first one has been carefully and strategically chosen. And if that was your guess or your instinct with this, then you'd be exactly right. Psalm 1 is like a bridge or a gateway into prayer. It's not quite a prayer in itself, although you could use it like that, but it is about prayer. Most specifically, it's about our preparation for prayer through what will be an unusual word for us, through meditation. Now, meditation, and it's there on the screen, is defined as the action or practice of meditating. That's not terribly helpful. A life of meditation. Now, some of the synonyms there at the bottom: contemplation, thought, thinking, musing, pondering, consideration, reflection, prayer, deliberation, study, rumination, cogitation, brooding, mulling over, reverie. Do anyone know what brown study is? I just left it out there out of curiosity. Concentration. One of the best definitions of what we might call Christian meditation comes from the 17th century and from a guy called Richard Baxter. And if we go forward one, Chris, it's there. Meditation is distinguished from the study of God's Word, in which the aim is to learn the truth. But meditation is the affecting of our hearts and minds to the love, to the delight contained in the Word. So according to Richard Baxter, Bible study is about gaining knowledge. Meditation is where the words of the Bible take root in our lives, affecting, in his language, our hearts and our minds, as it were. And so, if you like, the voice of God in our lives develops a lived out quality. It's got traction. The rubber has hit the road, as it were. It's not something we know about. In fact, God then has become not a something, but a someone that we know, and we have a living, talking, breathing, praying relationship with this person called God. That's what Richard Baxter is saying. And he's talking about this thing, meditation, and saying it's important. So when Psalm 1, in the middle of the psalm, right in the core of the psalm, says, "Blessed is the one who delights in the law of the law, law of the Lord, who meditates on it day and night," then we can be fairly certain in the middle of Psalm 1, the very first psalm in the book of Psalms, that something important is going on. A lot of prayer, a lot of our prayer, a lot of my prayer is unsatisfactory and unfulfilling because it is not preceded by meditation. Now that might sound good, but what on earth does it mean? Well, here is what a lot of prayer looks like. The next slide, there we go. Message in a bottle. Cry for help. Don't know if that's familiar, don't know if that describes your prayer life, etc. A different image of the same thing would be man in sea in dire straits with a flare. I'm sure that style or approach to prayer is familiar to you, and it's certainly familiar to me. God, if you're out there, please help me now. God, if you really exist, I need to know. We like to be in control of our lives. And many of us treat prayer like we treat the AA, the RAC, or Green Flag. How many of us, and this really is a hands-up question, have some sort of vehicle cover for the cars that we drive? Hands up? I'm not even going to ask who doesn't. Excellent. And that's especially important, let me affirm you in that, in this sort of winter weather. How many of us have called upon that cover in the last year? Much fewer set of hands, and I bet you were glad you had it. And I'm glad that a far fewer number of us have had reason to call the 4th emergency service in the last year. But if your use of the AA, the RAC, or Green Flag mirrors your prayer life, then that ain't so good. Cries for help to God are okay. The message in a bottle, the flare, the Dr. Ryan Stone facing her own mortality in that spacecraft, they're okay. I would never ever discourage you from doing this. In fact, just by the way, John Newton, the guy who wrote the words to the hymn Amazing Grace that I'm sure we know and love, came home to God while on a sinking ship and making just such a distress call to the Divine Emergency Service. So if someone like that can come to God via the emergency route, let's not dismiss emergency calls on the divine being. But if that's it, then we have to acknowledge that we're not really approaching God in the ideal way. Now, all of us struggle with technology from time to time. Here is on the screen one of my minor struggles with technology. You can see that's a screenshot of my iPhone, and you can see that there's a call to the church office underway. Now, can anyone spot what the problem is with that phone call? It's on mute. And there's a few of you are beginning to see where this is heading. Yes, I have inadvertently pressed the mute button. I think the deeper reason behind that is I've quite big ears. And when I put the phone to my ear, the phone seems to turn the call to mute. I can hear them, but they can't hear me. I don't know if you've been there. Hello? Hello? And you realize it's a one-way conversation that's going on. And I think so much of our prayer life is like that. That we're having one-way, occasional conversations with God Almighty. We are so ready to transmit, especially transmit in life's emergencies. And we are so unprepared or unwilling to receive. In our relationship with God, we need a two-way conversation. And prayer is our transmitter, but meditation, this new word for us, is the receiver. And if you only have your transmitter working, then it will be about as satisfying as a mobile phone conversation with an idiot who's pressed the mute button on their phone. You're not really getting anywhere. Lord, teach us to pray. No one ever taught me how. Eugene Peterson said this, and I think these words are on the screen as well. Let's read them together and then unpack them a little. Essential. Typical Eugene Peterson. It sounds profound, it is profound, but what on earth does that mean? Meditation means that I'm listening to what God might be saying before I respond to Him. Meditation precedes prayer in the sense that it's establishing a two-way communication between us and God. And if in fact we precede prayer by meditation, we ground, we root, we earth our prayers in what God has first said to us. There is a massive previousness of God's speech to our prayers. And this recognizes the possibility, indeed the likelihood, that what God might be saying to you is probably more important than what you might want to say to God. Not always. But if you were going in to see the boss at work, and the boss had called you into a meeting, you wouldn't start off by spending 10 minutes in a monologue. You would actually want to see what the boss has got to say. And if you happen to be the sort of worker who is habitually interrupting your boss so that she can't get a word in edgeways because you always have something more important to say, then you should probably get some careers advice. Now, why do so many of us then approach God in that way? Transmit, transmit, transmit. Prayer is the transmission. Meditation is the receiving. And according to Eugene Peterson, the first word should belong to God. So how do you meditate? How do you listen? How do you receive? How do you make yourself open or disposed to what God might be saying to you? Now, I'm not for a minute suggesting that you sit cross-legged on the floor for half an hour. Now, for most of us, that would produce a bad attack of cramp and little more. It certainly wouldn't get us towards a closer relationship with God. But here are a few approaches. There are many approaches to this. Find something that works for you. But here's one approach. Go home and try it if you want. Read a passage of the Bible. Ephesians chapter 3 is a very good example. Choose one verse as you've read Ephesians chapter 3. Choose one verse that has stood out to you. Here's an example of a possibility from Ephesians chapter 3. This happens to be verse 20. Now, in 30 seconds of silence, read that verse on the screen, then read it again, and read it again. And choose one word or one phrase in that somehow seems important to you. This is one, if you like, approach to meditation. Only one. There are hundreds. But choose something in there that is speaking to you where you are today in your life. And then, filled with that phrase of what God might be saying to you, begin to pray. Let God set your agenda in prayer. Your whole prayer will have started off on an entirely different trajectory. It will no longer be circumscribed by your horizons, your agenda, your problems. You will have been invited into the presence of our Father in heaven, and He will set you on the right road. There are so many other ways of meditating, and we'll cover some in the weeks ahead. Get Bible readings like Daily Bread, and take time each day to use it. A Bible reading, a reflection, a prayer, that is meditation. When I first came to Buljaffrey, Helen Eaton used to sell those Bible reading notes, and a small group of folk took them up. We've forgotten about this as a church, and it's probably something we should get back to. I get a couple of emails every morning, one with a quote from Henri Nouwen and an associated Bible passage, and the other from C.S. Lewis. I don't look at them every day, and probably I only get round to them once a week. Life doesn't go in straight lines. I think God understands that. But often those emails that arrive in my inbox are helpful to me. The folk who produced the prayer course, 24/7 prayer, of a website, there it is. There are a huge number of resources on that website. There are ways and means of helping us learn how to pray. And above all, make a resolution to come along to the prayer course. I'd taken my bike to Anstruther between Christmas and New Year. Didn't get much cycling, it was far too windy, but there was one particularly good day. And I went for a 20-mile cycle, and there's a lovely cafe on the seafront at Anstruther in the sunshine. And I sat down and I ordered a latte and a cinnamon bun. After 20 miles on the bike, you deserve a cinnamon bun. And it was brilliant. It was just after the Rangers-Hibs game. And there were a couple on different tables, and they were smoking. And they had that creased, lined face that someone in there kind of, who's been smoking for a long time has. And the woman, they kind of knew each other. It was great listening to Fife. Maybe I shouldn't be, maybe it's unfair lugging in on this. But the woman wanted to talk about Susie, her cat. And that was her agenda. And the man was delighted that Rangers had beaten Hibs 4-2. And the two of them had this, I don't know if you'd call it a conversation. It was like, did you see the game last night? No. My cat's feeling a lot better. Oh, it was great. They won 4-2. She's been awful poorly before Christmas, but the vet's been great. Oh, I haven't seen them play like that for a while. I was getting worried. Oh, I'm so relieved that my cat's better. And it went on and on for like 5 minutes. And it was on totally parallel tracks. You've heard conversations like that. Don't let that describe your prayer life. Learn how to meditate. You may not like the word, but what it's describing might change your life. Let's sing, "Oh, for a closer walk with thee."